Hello, I'm Martin Alsbrook, and for my midterm project, I decided to make Snake using JavaScript. I'm just going to play the game really quickly so you can see how it works. Essentially, you move the snake around this grid and eat these red squares, and every red square you eat, your score goes up by 1. If you hit the wall, or if the snake hits itself, the snake dies, and that's how you lose the game. You can also set the difficulty down here, so if you think it's too hard or too easy, you can adjust it accordingly. Yeah. So a little overview of my code. It's primarily JavaScript with some HTML and CSS. The styling comes from my site's primary style sheet in order to keep the styling coherent, but I also added some styling specifically to this page. I tried to give the page a very old computer retro feel by making it high contrast and not adding many colors or details. I also thought this aesthetic fit with the snake's choppy movement, which is why I chose it. Most of my project is JavaScript, as I said, and one thing I thought was interesting is that the game board is actually procedurally generated using JavaScript instead of hard-coded in HTML. The HTML is mainly used in order to make the UI on the left side of the screen, and I also had to use it to set the default states of the UI, such as the difficulty, score, and heading. I added the difficulties at the bottom, or just in general, I added the difficulties in order to make the game fun for any player that wanted to play it. I didn't want it to be too hard or too easy for players to have fun. So in order to make the game board, I initially considered using canvases because doing research that was suggested to me, but I didn't really understand canvases, and I already had some ideas about how I could make the game board using divs, so I just went with divs instead. So essentially it's a grid of nested divs, and I create this grid using a modified version of a function I found while doing research, and essentially the function creates 16 rows, and each of those rows is given 16 flexbox divs inside of it, and each of these divs is assigned an ID with its coordinates so that I can reference these divs later on in the code. So this is 0, 0, and this is 15, 15. Okay, so in order to draw the snake and the food, I created 3 classes that each have different styling, and I can toggle these classes on or off for each cell. In order to draw the snake, I track the head and the tail of the snake, and when the head goes over a cell, the cell is turned on or toggled on, and when the tail travels over a cell, the cell is toggled back off. The food is also drawn similarly, just by selecting a random set of coordinates and toggling that cell to cell food. And yeah. So the status and high scores are just updated by using JavaScript to change the inner HTML of the UI. The score is based on the length of the snake, and whenever the score is greater than the high score is updated. So in order to take in inputs from the user, I use an event listener using key down, and that essentially lets me reference any key pressed by the user. So I then sort through these keys and I look for up, down, left, and right, and I set a boolean or a set of booleans to the direction the snake is currently moving. So if up was pressed last, then up will be true and every other boolean will be false. Down was pressed, down will be true and everything else will be false. So the game mainly runs off this set timeout function, which I can use inside of other functions to call them repeatedly after a certain amount of time. So essentially every tick or 100 milliseconds on medium, I call the function again, and I can perform a set of actions on the snake repeatedly. But it's like, if I just used the while loop, then it would happen too fast, so I use this function to do it after a set amount of time. So every tick, the snake is moved, and I check if the snake hit a wall, itself, or any food. And I track if the snake hit itself by keeping an array of the snake's current coordinates, and if the snake's head coordinates are equal to any coordinates in that array, I know the snake hit itself, and I end the game. And this repeatedly running function starts running as soon as the player hits any arrow keys. And yeah, that's essentially my JavaScript snake. Thank you.